Boston. Kaveh Afrasiabi is a political scientist and author of the book Trump and Iran: From Containment to Confrontation. In our Washington studio is Barbara Slavin, the director of the Future of Iran Initiative at the Atlantic Council. Also with us is Abbas Kadhim, the director of the Iraq Initiative, also at the Atlantic Council. And from Pennsylvania, the co-founder and leader of the U.S. Tea Party movement, Michael Johns. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Kaveh, let me begin with you. Many see this as the most significant escalation since the 1979 hostage crisis. Is this, in fact, a game changer?
I certainly think so. President Trump, his hands are stained with the blood of 10 martyrs, 5 from Iran, 5 from Iraq, may resort to any shenanigan trying to justify his unilateral act of war against Iran, but that's not going to wash with anyone, particularly with millions of Iranians who throughout Iran are now mourning the loss of their national hero, who was a selfless, dedicated, humble soldier for the cause of the nation for the past 40 years. And this crime, this unprovoked crime by the United States will not go unpunished, and the Iranians have vowed to retaliate, and they will do so at the time and place of their own choosing. And this is what President Trump has provoked, and now, you know, he will wait for the blowback. And that will be coming before too long. I assure you of that, because I know the spirit of the Iranian people, and there's a preamble in the Islamic constitution that talks about the sapling soul of the revolution that is nurtured by the blood of martyrs.
All right, Kaveh, let me
no more precious martyr than General Soleimani, who was murdered in cold blood in the hands of the Americans.
Barbara, no doubt in the West that Soleimani was not exactly an angel. This is a bad person. He's responsible for the deaths of thousands of people, Americans, Syrians, Iraqis, as well as Iranians. You wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. You said, yes, he's the bad guy, but that's not the point. Revenge is not a strategy. Explain that to us.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we can go back to history.
Excuse me, I find that so offensive.
Excuse me, Kaveh.
That you're supposed to be neutral.
Kaveh, it's Barbara's turn. We will come back to you.
You belittle a national hero like that. I'm going to walk out of your goddamn program.
Excuse me.
It's offensive to the Iranians
Kaveh,
that you belittle a national hero like this.
This is something that is widely believed in the West, that he is responsible for thousands of deaths.
And that glamorous journalist has broadcast that to the world as well. This is shameful.
Can we continue our discussion so you can actually chime in some more, or are you going to walk off the set and be disrespectful to our guests sitting in the studio? Barbara, yes, go ahead and respond.
Yeah, look, actually what I was about to say was that the United States turned Qasem Soleimani into an enemy in 2003 in Iraq. In fact, the Quds Force helped the United States overthrow the Taliban after the September 11 attacks. But the fact remains that the Quds Force has supported a number of groups that, as you say, have killed over 600 American troops in Iraq, have killed thousands of people in Syria and in other places. So he's was definitely a controversial figure. However, revenge, as I wrote, is not a strategy, which means that I don't think the Trump administration considered the consequences of this action for U.S. national interests, for the interests of U.S. allies in the region. Iran will retaliate, and it will pick a place and a time of its choosing. And more disturbing, and my colleague Abbas will talk about this, the United States has put Iraq in a completely untenable position where it cannot have 5,000 U.S. troops remaining there. The other factor that I think we have to consider is what this means for what was left of the nuclear agreement, the JCPOA. Many of us have been trying to salvage it in hopes that another American president might return to it. I don't see how Iran remains in compliance, and I'm bracing myself for some very aggressive Iranian actions on the nuclear front as well. So the world is not safer, despite what Mike Pompeo says. Everything is much, much worse than it was before the United States quit the Iran nuclear deal.
Well, let's take a listen to what U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had to say. He basically saying Soleimani was actively plotting in the region. He said the risk of doing nothing was enormous. Let's listen.
I can't talk too much about the nature of the threats, but the American people should know that President Trump's decision to remove Qasem Soleimani from the battlefield saved American lives. There's no doubt about that. He was actively plotting in the region to take actions, a big action as he described it, that would have put dozens, if not hundreds, of American lives at risk. We know it was imminent. This was an intelligence-based assessment that drove our decision-making process.
Michael Johns, let me come to you. Where is the evidence?
Well, I mean, let's start with the fact that under UN sanctions, Soleimani was not to have even been in Iraq, so he was there in violation of international law. U.S. intelligence intercepted information on the verge of his arrival that he was there to do his job. And let's be clear about what his job is.
That does not mean he was plotting something sinister. Well, if the United States is going to say that this man was plotting something and there was an imminent attack, where is the evidence?
Well, let me just say this. The evidence exists in the hands of the U.S. government. It's not the obligation or responsibility of the U.S. government to reveal those means or methods. But what does this man do? Soleimani has been, since his emergence in Iran, primary force of global terrorism throughout the world, not just in Iraq, where he was responsible for the killing of hundreds of Americans, but in Lebanon, in Yemen, in Syria, where he was responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths, and in repeated attacks against the state of Israel. He has been, throughout his entire existence, an anti-American terrorist focused exclusively on the killing of American and the undermining of American interests. And let me just say this. Last time I appeared with you guys on Iran issue, I believe there was a professor from the University of Tehran, Mohammad Marandi, as I recall, who was mocking Trump's inaction following the downing of the multi-million-dollar American
how about we
drone.
focus on today and the developments of the last 24 hours? Go ahead.
Yeah,
quickly,
just a final point on that. I cautioned at that time to take this president seriously. Iran went on from there to continue a whole series of regional terrorist activities and undertakings, including attacking a petroleum facility in Saudi Arabia, including rocket.
They have repeatedly denied. And once again, the U.S. did not prove any evidence.
Their word is, sadly, their word is worth very little
let me move on.
In today's world by anyone. And then rocket attacks against American facilities, 10 facilities, in fact, that killed an American contractor, injured 3 American soldiers. So this was not a provocative act. It was a defensive act. It is not an escalating act. It should prove a de-escalating act by removing one of the more evil terrorist supporters in that region in the history of our life.
I got to get Abbas into the conversation. Abbas, a de-escalating act?
No, it is an escalation. One cannot redefine things and just call them whatever they wish. It is an escalation because this act has been probably the most significant and consequential action that took place in Iraq after the 2003 invasion and regime change, and after ISIS taking over of Mosul. Iraq has not witnessed such a consequential act. And from an Iraq perspective, as you know, I work on Iraq, and I think the Iraqis have been put in the eye of the storm, basically, and the Iraqi leadership was trying as much as they could to steer their country away from the U.S.-Iran conflict, which is, Iraq is not part of it. And both countries seem to choose that they would settle their scores on the Iraqi theater. And it happened in a worse time because the Iraqi government just resigned. It's a caretaker government. It doesn't have much of authority right now. The Iraqis are divided because of the protests that toppled the government. And also, we have a parliament that is divided. Iraq just got out of a brutal fight against ISIS terrorism. And it is time for them to take a deep breath and to have some stability to rebuild, reconstruct the nation, put back their society, the traumatized populations, the IDPs. Until now, there is about over 1.5 million people there still waiting to get home.
Is there a sense that this is going to stoke anti-American sentiment?
It already did. It already did, because basically, see, the United States presence in Iraq has never been popular, even though as a person, and also many people, including the Iraqi government and Iraqi strategists, think that it is important for Iraq to have a very strong relation with the United States. The U.S. military presence has been very helpful in the defeat of ISIS, also training the Iraqis. Iraq is purchaser of American weapons. There are other aspects of U.S. presence in Iraq. The U.S. aid has been doing a lot of good work. All of that will be out of the window. The U.S. Embassy in Baghdad just asked all American citizens to immediately leave Iraq. And my prediction is that for the next year, there is nowhere in Iraq that would be safe for any American. Of course, all of the contracts, these $53 billion for Exxon, the $14 billion for GE, this is all basically out of the window. There is no way any American business is going to operate in Iraq. And as Barbara just mentioned, the future of the presence of the 5,000 plus troops in Iraq are going to be decided very soon, because again, this government, especially Adel Abdel Mahdi, who felt betrayed really just 2 days ago, he staked his reputation and personally intervened to get the protesters and the vandals out of the U.S. Embassy vicinity, and guaranteed them that he would take things politically. And then just lo and behold, just after that attack that happened in Anbar, just before the New Year's Eve, that he was not put, or told about. Now we get this immediately, and he looks absolutely terrible.
And I should say, Iraq's leadership has called what the Americans did a massive violation of their sovereignty. Kaveh, I'm glad you decided to stay. What kind of? That's okay. What kind of response is predictable from Iran, or what kind of response can we expect from the Iranians? Would it come in a military form? Would it be in some kind of a cyber attack form? Or what are you thinking? And how much is that going to escalate the situation even more?
Asya, before I address that question, let me just very quickly say that one of the reasons Soleimani is much revered in Iran is that he is regarded as a bulwark against terrorism, particularly against Daesh terrorism in Iraq and Syria.
And I think in the beginning of my introduction,
should know that.
I did say he is considered a national hero in Iran. I said that.
Okay, but I'm saying that his role beyond Iran, if it wasn't because of Soleimani, ISIS would be in Damascus today. ISIS would be in Kirkuk and Baghdad today. And if you look at the statement from the Russian Defense Ministry, they refer to him as a very effective counterterrorism leader that should be appreciated. And yet you have these people in Washington and so on, from the so-called think tanks that try to smear him, and at the same time saying that, although he was such an evil, killing him was not such a good idea. They can't have their cake and eat it too. They distort the nature of Soleimani's very critical contributions to the cause of anti-terrorism in the region, and they depict him as a terrorist when he was not. He collaborated with the Americans and the Iraqi militias when they were fighting ISIS in Mosul.
Actually, Kaveh makes a very good point here, because Soleimani, you can say whatever you want about him and what he's done in terms of crimes and murders that the West says he's behind, but this man and his Quds forces were instrumental in the fight against ISIS. So, Michael Johns, would you at least agree on that?
And also Taliban in Afghanistan.
Okay, Michael Johns, please.
Iran has had an interest, obviously, in expanding its influence in Iraq, and so there was an interest in their focus on eliminating ISIS influence. But the history of this man is recognized by the United Nations, by the EU, as designated terrorist by the United States, has been one of absolute atrocities and vast crimes across that region. That's in dispute. You can say he was a hero of Iran. What you really say is he was a hero of the Iranian government, despised by the Iranian people.
That is not what that means.
Okay, well, if you're saying that the man
what are you talking about? Get your facts straight, sir.
I'm getting. Let me give you the facts, sir. The people of Iran have had it with the subjugation, the atrocities, the killings, the vast human rights violations. This has emerged
as one of the most
repressive regimes in the country.
Are you talking about Saudi Arabia? At least they have elections in Iraq.
The responses can't be to continually change the subject. Soleimani oversaw vast amounts of that domestic suppression in addition to the work that he did in supporting terrorism throughout the region. This man was no hero to the people of Iran. He is enemy number one to the vast majority of the people of Iran.
Well, guess what? Even
you might be of the same mouthpieces who said that about Che Guevara and Nelson Mandela and General Gia.
We have other people in the studio.
That's what you are, sir. You're an American imperialist mouthpiece who downgrades revolutionary leaders like Che Guevara, Gia,
Kaveh and Michael, let me move on. Let me move on here. I want to get international reaction. Benjamin Netanyahu, Israeli Prime Minister, applauded this move. The French were one of the first to respond after the attack, basically saying we're waking up to a much more dangerous world. China is calling for restraint. Let's play a soundbite from China's foreign ministry.
China has always opposed the use of force in international relations. We advocate that all sides should earnestly respect the goals and principles of the Charter of the United Nations and the basic norms of international relations. Iraq's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity should be respected. The stability and peace in the Middle East Gulf region should be maintained.
Barbara and Abbas, this question is for you. What does the international community need to do? Countries like China, countries like Russia, what do they need to do to defuse this crisis? And is there still any chance left for diplomacy? Abbas, quickly, please.
There is always room for diplomacy. I mean, that's what's so great about diplomats is that, people just screw up all over and then the diplomats go there and do their best to fix what they have done and pick up the pieces. But I am afraid that, it depends on what you are talking about here. Can diplomats put back the U.S.-Iraqi relations, which is my main concern on a daily basis? The answer is negative. No, they will not be able to do that. The U.S. has bombed its interests in Iraq for the next few years to come, if not permanently. Can the diplomats maybe go and do some damage to, mitigate the problems between Iran and the United States? Possible, but it takes a lot of hard work. And I think we need mediators right now, not diplomats. I think U.S. diplomats cannot do anything. Iranian diplomats cannot do anything. We need a mediator who is credible.
Who would be a good mediator?
That's the problem, because we screwed up all of our mediators. Pulling out of the Iran deal angered all of the Europeans who put their names on the deal, and then we just said, sorry, we are out, and we left them in the cold. And who is going to really go there and guarantee? That's what a mediator would do, guarantee the future actions of President Trump and his administration. Nobody will. And if they do, can they deliver? And that is the hardship of it. I think this is, it's not about whether Soleimani is bad or good, as Barbara brought. It's not about whether this person has done crimes or not. It is where has this act put us, and especially with countries like Iraq that is a bystander in this. Iraq is not really part of the conflict, and Iraq is becoming the ground where two big elephants are fighting, and everybody right now is crushed in Iraq.
Barbara, how much of a turning point was the United States withdrawal, unilateral withdrawal from JCPOA, imposing crippling economic sanctions on Iran? JCPOA is pretty much on life support. Not sure if it can be saved at this point.
Everything flows from that. That's when the escalation began. The United States declared economic war on Iran, and Iran, since May of last year, has been retaliating. And you know, this is unfortunately where we are now. To your question about whether there can be mediation, I mean, I think we're going to see that both China and Russia will become much more respected powers in the Middle East because they can talk to all sides. You know, they might try to diffuse tensions somewhat, but the real problem is in Washington, and frankly, that's where we need to see regime change most.
Kaveh, is the real problem in Washington?
Yes, and some of that is stemming from think tanks like Atlantic Council that acted like Trump whisperer by putting out a report
okay, let's be respectful
at the
to our
incipient
panel.
stage of Trump saying that there's a need for a new nuclear agreement. I find that so hypocritical that they can sit there with a straight face and talk about lamenting
I don't know what
Barbara,
you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about, Kaveh, but
really?
I can say for
go
sure.
Back and read the Atlantic reports on the need for a new nuclear agreement.
Yeah, well, right now I would settle for no war between the U.S. and Iran.
Michael Johns, war is not an option, is it?
Yeah, no one wants war. I think it's important to reiterate, as the president said today, that the United States does not seek war with Iran. The United States does not seek regime change with Iran. But if it is Iran's decision and choice to threaten U.S. lives and U.S. interests throughout that region, it's going to be met with force. And to say that doing that escalates the situation dismisses the entire last several years of Iran gradually escalating this situation. And you can look back specifically at the downing of the drone when the president consciously did nothing and was mocked by Iran for doing nothing.
We were running out of time.
Let me just finish.
Go ahead,
point.
Quickly,
they have not respected American restraint. They have mocked it and escalated it. And yesterday it was met with a very decisive step that has weakened Iran as a terrorist nation. And that's
Iran has complied by the terms of the JCPOA. And the only time they exceeded and went outside that agreement is when the United States started withdrawing from this landmark accord, which, by the way, the Europeans, the Chinese, the Russians still support.
Yeah, well, just to give you a response on that. Number one, that is not a verifiable agreement. That's one of the reasons it was a prime 2016. It was a prime 2016 campaign issue. The American people supported President Trump, whose primary foreign policy plank was getting out of that agreement.
You haven't even bothered to read the agreement.
Nor did, if I could just finish, please. Did the death to the American chance never stopped. The support for Hamas and Hezbollah never stopped from the Iran agreement. Iran was empowered by it.
Barbara and gentlemen, thank you so much.
Astounding.
We have run out of time. Thank you all. Kaveh Afrasiabi, Barbara Slavin, Abbas Kadhim, and Michael Johns. A lively discussion. Thank you all. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Asiye Namdar in Washington. Thanks for watching.